Recently at an event called Culturama, I participated on a historical panel with other writers that were historical authors, and we discussed adding historical details to fiction novels. So today I'm going to talk about how much truth should go into a historical novel and what you can expect from authors who write historicals.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
I'd like to welcome you to my channel. I am Julia Monte, women's fiction author, and I created this channel to offer tips to writers who are currently writing their stories. So let's talk about historical novels. The first type would be mostly a historical story with a few characters tossed in, but a lot of the story has to do with the historical events of the time. The second type of fictional historical novel is the one where it's mostly about the characters and they're set in a historical time period, and yes, there are historical events happening or the speech or certain things are from that time period, but the story is really about these fictional characters who just happen to be placed in this time period. The third is one where history is flipped on its side. An example of this would be Stephen King's 11/22/63, where he has his character go back in time and try to change John F. Kennedy's assassination. So although it does take place in the past and there are historical figures and events, it's an alternate view of history, and it kind of plays with history. No matter what type of historical novel you choose to write, if you are choosing to write a historical novel, you want to include some signposts. Okay, so for all three of those, you want to let people know that they are going back into the past. And so these signposts could be a number of things. It could be the language that the characters are using, which would be different from the language from today's modern language. It could be clothing. So how are the characters dressing? Are they dressing for that time period? What kind of clothes are they wearing? I've read many like Regency romances where the woman is dressed in flowing dresses with corsets and all of that. And that, of course, puts us back into that time period. It could be the transportation. So they might not, probably will not be in cars if you're going back far enough. Now, the historical that I wrote, it was just in the 1960s. So obviously they did have cars, but they had to be the right kind of cars. I had to go and do some research. Did this car exist? What kind of cars did Ford make? What kind of cars did, other car manufacturers make at that time? So, or are they riding horses, or what are they doing? Something else that would allow readers to know that they are going back in the past could be the attitude that the characters have. So I know in some of the romances, if I go back far enough, they the way that the heroes are portrayed is a lot different. They're a lot more domineering, at least from our point of view in the current time. They just, their attitude is different. Women's attitude was different at that time too. So you want to make sure that you're portraying that. And again, going back to language, and what I should have said there too, is that you want to make sure that you are researching what kind of words people were using at the time period that you're writing. Some words may not have been used in the past. So if you are using modern language to either giving that language to your characters or using it yourself as a narrator, it could jolt the reader out because they'll say, well, did they really say that back then? Right? So you got to be careful with language. Keeping in mind that these signposts are important because they set the reader into the past, you want to include as many of these as makes sense for your novel, but enough to allow the reader to know that they are in the past. Therefore, the setting of your story is super important. And readers of historical novels actually have more patience for longer descriptions. Not that you want to create tons of descriptions of furniture or anything like that. Showing the reader what things look like, what things felt like, because again, it's different from today. So that's part of the fun and the joy of going into the past, is that you get to experience being there. So you want to spend some time with that setting. And it's important that you be accurate because readers have the right and they demand that you are accurate with your historical events, dates, and all of that. Unless you make it clear to the reader, like in Stephen King's book, that you are playing with history, but even he was accurate anytime time that the character went back in time. He described things differently. The character had different soda pops. He dressed differently. He dressed for the time. And everything that King described of that 1960s time period would have reflected exactly what it was like back then. And every time that the character went back in time, King made sure that through this character's perspective, modern day perspective, he noticed the differences between 1963 and today. So let's talk about truth. Most writers who write historical fiction would agree that it's important to make things as accurate as possible and include what most people would consider true. But let's talk about that. What is truth? Can we add buildings that didn't exist? Can we change street names? Can we add things like that? Can we add an entire city or town that really didn't exist? What about products? Can we say that a character bought a Hershey bar in 1895 when Milton Hershey didn't really release his Hershey bar until 1900? Would our readers notice that? Would they care? Well, for the most part, yes, I think they would care. Readers do have a lot of tolerance, but they do want historical accuracy. They don't want a character buying a product that didn't exist yet. And if they know that it didn't exist, it will bother them. If the character is using a gun that wasn't made until later in history and they're using it, that's obviously going to jar someone out of the story. And that's the last thing you want. You don't want your character to be pulled out of the story because they say, hey, wait a minute, how's he using this gun? I know a lot about guns and this one wasn't available yet. Or I know that the Hershey bar was created in 1900, so how in the world are they buying it 5 years before it was created, right? So readers will probably write that author and say, you need to do better research, because what they're going to think is not that you were playing with history, that you were moving things around, that it didn't really matter, that, you know, they bought a candy bar that didn't exist yet. But it will to your reader, because your reader will assume that you just didn't do the research, and you don't want that. You don't want your reader to think that you're not doing your work as an author. Now, some truth, the characters will accept that you're making things up. Okay, so for example, if your fictional character meets a historical figure when they obviously never did, because this is a fictional character meeting an actual person, but actual readers love that. They love to see your characters interacting with people. In the movie Titanic, right? Jack and Rose run around that entire ship talking to historical figures. They talk to Molly Brown. They talk to the captain, Captain Smith. So that's okay. We accept that. We know it's not true, but we accept that as readers because it just makes it fun. We can see that our characters are interacting with historical figures, and so it brings that history to life. So you can twist the truth, but you have to be careful on what you choose to twist, okay? So, okay, let's talk about then lying. When is it okay to outright lie? Would that ever be okay in a historical novel? And yes, so there are some places where you can lie because we have to. Okay, so for example, dialogue. If our characters are speaking to a historical figure, they're speaking to Benjamin Franklin, obviously that conversation never happened, but you have a fictional character and a historical figure, and they're going to have a conversation. You're going to make that entire conversation up because it never really happened. Or even if two historical figures are having a conversation, you can make up what they say because we have no idea what they said to each other. So we know that they met. We know through history maybe that they had a meeting together, that they had a conversation, but we don't really know what they said to each other. And so as long as it's logical, it fits your story, then it's okay to create the dialogue and add that creativity into your novel at that point, because again, we have no option. And Stephen King does do this in his novel 11/22/63. He has his main character, Jake Epping, I think his last name was, meet with Lee Harvey Oswald's wife, Marina, in one of the scenes. He talks to her, and I don't remember if he talks to Oswald, but so of course this never happened. Fictional character, real person, but he talks to her in the novel, and of course all of that is a lie. It never happened. The character doesn't exist. The conversation never happened, but we accept it as part of the novel because it's part of the novel. That we know that that is fiction, and that's probably why we're willing to accept it, because we know that that part is fiction, and so anything that you say is okay. And an important thing to remember is that what you have to do is you have to set the rules for your novel. You have to let the reader know, what are you doing with this story? If you know by reading the back cover of Stephen King's book that he is taking a fictional character and having him go back in time to try to stop the assassination of JFK, you know none of this happened. So you're okay with fake conversations, you're okay with certain things being twisted, because as this character actually does go back in time and change history, it starts to mess up some other parts of it. He has to keep going back in time in his book. So a lot of that stuff changes and changes and changes, and obviously never happened. So, but that was the rule of the book. That was okay. We accepted this. I did this in 2 of my books, and that was then and this is now. I set this story in a fictional town very similar to the one that I live in, but I gave it a completely fake name and different name. Although some of the locations and some of the businesses and things that I wrote about are exactly like in my city. The reason that I did this is because I wanted to have the freedom of changing certain things if I wanted to. If I wanted to change a street, if I wanted to add a business that doesn't exist, I wanted to be able to do it. So I created a fictional town in a real community of California. So the reader knew this, they knew that this place didn't really exist, even though it was very similar to little towns in the area that do exist. This gave the reader the feeling of being in the area without them having to really focus on a particular city or a particular town and say, oh, wait a minute, it's not like that. There is no street there. There is no, they could just feel what it feels like to be in the area without focusing on a specific city. Now, something that readers do not like is if you lie to them and betray what they think you're going to do. So you set the rules, and if they accept the rules, perfect. But there was an author, a memoirist, James Frey, who wrote A Million Little Pieces, and this was a memoir based on his life. And he had all kinds of events. He had people that had died. He had all kinds of things. He had a drug issue. And everybody assumes that a memoir is true. It's based on your life. Yes, you're not going to, the dialogue might not be exactly the same for a character. It might be a little different, but people believe that those accounts of your life are actually true. And for him, he made up a ton of things that did not happen. It was just fiction. Well, if you're writing fiction, that's okay. If you're writing a memoir, it's not okay. And readers will feel betrayed. They will feel angry because you broke the rules. You wrote something, you wrote fiction, and you said it was a memoir, right? So you have to be careful that the audience, the reader, knows the rules, accepts the rules, and then that you stick to it, that you don't change it on them. So the beauty of historical novels is that they transport us back in time. They're fun to read. Sometimes they teach us something about the past. We learn things, but not in a boring way. It's not a bunch of facts that we have to remember. We learn it as we're following these characters, and it becomes fun to read. And through the stories and the characters, the past actually comes alive for us and it becomes real. And something else that I really like about historical novels is that we learn that people have always been the same in the past and the present, right? We all have the same fears, we have dreams, we have goals for our life, and we come to understand really what motivates people. And the same things that motivate us today were things that motivated people in the past. So we come to sympathize with people. We come to understand like why they behaved in certain ways. You understand the struggles that they had if they were in wars and how they built the world that we live in today. And sometimes historicals even prompt us to do a little research of our own. So if something interested us about the story, we might go back and actually do a little research and find out more and learn more about history. So I think historical novels are a lot of fun to read. They're a challenge to write. The Let Us Begin was my historical novel, and it only went back to the 60s. It was from the 60s to the 90s. And that was challenging enough. I don't know that I would write another historical novel, but I had a lot of fun writing that one, and I love to read them. So let me know what you think about historical novels. Do you love to read historical novels, and do you plan to write one? So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, like always, I ask you to please like the video so that it does better on YouTube. Also to subscribe to the channel and to share it with your writing friends. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week.